Mrs. Van Dyke grew more communicative in regard to him. He was eccentric, of course, but his eccentricities were such as did him credit. One thing she told me made a lasting impression on me. Mrs. Ransom, the lady in whose house he lived, had left her home very suddenly. He anticipated a like return, so ever since her departure it had been his invariable custom to have the table set for 3, so that he might never be surprised by her arrival. It had become a monomania with him. Never did he sit down without there being enough before him for a small family, and as his food was all brought in cooked from a neighboring restaurant, this eccentricity of his was well known and gave an added éclat to his otherwise hermit-like habits. To my mind it added an element of pathos to his seclusion, and so affected me that one day I dared to remark to him, "You must have liked Mrs. Ransom very much. You are so faithful in your remembrance of her." I never presumed again to attack any of his foibles. He gave me first a hard look, then an indulgent one, and finally managed to say, after a moment of quiet hesitation, "You allude to my custom of setting 2 chairs at the table to which they may return at any minute? Miss Hunter, what I do in the loneliness of that great house is not worth the gossip of those who surround you." Flushing till I wished my curls would fall down and hide my cheeks, I tried to stammer out some apology, but he drove it back with the passionate word, "Delight, idol of my heart, come and see what a lonely place that old house is. Come and live in that house, at least for a little time, till I can arrange for you a brighter and a happier home. Come and be my wife." It was sudden. It was all but unlooked for, and like all his expressions of feeling, frenzied rather than resolute. But it was a declaration that met my most passionate longings, and in the elation it brought I forgot for the moment the doubts it called up. Otherwise I had been a woman rather than a girl, and this tale had never been written. "You love me, Delight." He was already pressing me in his arms. "You love me, or you would never have rushed so impetuously to warn me of my danger that night. Make me the maddest, happiest man in all the world by saying you will not wait, that you will not ask counsel of anybody or anything but your affection, but marry me at once. Marry me while my heart yearns for you so deeply. Marry me before I go away." "Go away?" "Yes, I am going away. Mrs. Ransom and her daughter are coming back, and I am going away. Will you go with me?" With what intensity he spoke, yet with hardness. I quivered while I listened, yet I made no move to withdraw from him. Had he asked me to step with him from the housetop, I should hardly have refused, while his heart throbbed so wildly against mine, and his eyes lured me on with such a promise of ecstasy. "You will." How peremptory he could be. "You will." How triumphant also. I hardly realized what I had done till I stood abashed before Mrs. Van Dyke and told her I had engaged myself to marry Mr. Allison before he went to Europe. Then it seemed I had done a very good thing. She congratulated me heartily, and seeing I had a certain fear of taking my Anne into my confidence, promised to sit down and write to her herself, using every encomium she could think of to make this sudden marriage, on my part, seem like the result of reason and wise forethought. Such an estimable man! Such an old neighbor, so domestic in his tastes, and oh, so wise to find out and make his own the slyest and most bewildering little beauty that has come into New York this many a season. These were some of her words, and though pleasing at the time, they made me think deeply, more deeply than I wished to, after I went upstairs to my room. Estimable, an old neighbor, domestic in his tastes? Had she said handsome, masterful in his air and spirit, a man to make a girl forget the real end of life and think only of the present pleasure, I should not have had such a fierce reaction. But estimable? Was he estimable? I tried to cry out yes. I tried to keep down the memory of that moment when, with a dozen passions suddenly let loose, one of them fear, He strode by me and locked the door against all help, under an impetus he had tried in vain to explain. Nothing would quiet the still, small voice speaking in my breast, or give to the moment that unalloyed joy which belongs to a young girl's betrothal. I was afraid. Why? Mr. Allison never came in the evening, another of his peculiarities. Other men did, but what were other men to me now? This night I pleaded weariness. Mrs. Van Dyke understood me, and remained in my room. I wanted to study the face of my lover under the new conditions. Was he in his old seat? Yes. And would he read as usual, or